Now we take a look at some of your headlines, some of your newspapers rather, and what's making headlines in the Sunday papers. We're going to start off with the Sunday Times. And I told you about that big explosive story that they're running there, which we will interview the mayor about on the program today. A 4 billion rand divergence of G20 to avoid a G20 protest taking place had been agreed to by the mayoral committee. Some of the money comes from organizations and institutions like the Johannesburg Roads Agency, as well as Johannesburg Water. And of course, it is worth mentioning that Johannesburg Water has been an ailing institution that itself is thin on capital and funds. And all of this is capital expenditure finances. That is to say, finances that it currently needs to exist, not future investments into the organization. That is to say that the water crisis in Johannesburg may well be affected by this divergence. We'll get answers on that from the mayor a little bit later on. And then I want to take you to the Sunday World. Now, very interesting story taking place in the Sunday World. In fact, they're leading in the top margins of the paper with comments from Snooky Zigalala from the ANC's Veterans League. And he is calling out and at least complaining about many ANC leaders, particularly in the Eastern Cape, who have been circulating a letter that's calling for President Cyril Ramaphosa's head. Many are calling for the NEC to be disbanded and for a national task team to be instituted. This national task team will be led by Thabo Mbeki, as they argue there. Now, Snooky Zigalala says that this will cause disruptions to the organization, and of course, the disruptions will spill on over into the national government. Ultimately, he says this is an undemocratic exercise and that those who want to contest power would have to wait to do so at the next elective conference. Now, this is reports from a letter that apparently had been circulating amongst senior leaders in the ANC, seemingly originating, according to Snooky Zigalala, out of the Eastern Cape, where some of these calls are being made for Cyril Ramaphosa's head to be on the chopping block. In fact, and importantly here, it is also in that same letter that the call for Thabo Mbeki to replace him as in an interim structure, such as a national task team in place of the National Executive Committee comes from. And that is what is in the Sunday World. In fact, the Sunday World also leads with a story on Mandela's family's pro-Israel blooper. Now, a granddaughter of Nelson Mandela had undertaken a trip to Israel, and this has drawn the ire of some members of the family. This granddaughter in particular seemingly also had positive and glowing remarks about her trip to Israel, and given, of course, that a grandson of Nelson Mandela had just been bombarded and, of course, attacked in international waters by the Israeli Defense Force, can, of course, draw that sort of comparison and that sort of ire. It's one of the stories leading there in the Sunday Times. And then in the top left margin of the Sunday World, in fact, is the story on Makate's Vodacom settlement. Now, this has been a developing story over the span of the week. A company, BlackRock Mining, has threatened to take legal action against Makate, but had written a letter of demand to Vodacom saying that it should not pay any monies due to Makate just yet, that the money should be held in a trust until their dispute is resolved. They claim that they're entitled to 40% of the money that has been agreed to in the settlement. They argue that BlackRock Mining, that is, argues that they had funded Makate in excess of 5 million rand at the start of his lawsuit to fund his lawsuit. And the agreement that was that they would be due 40% of whatever the settlement would be, or whatever the courts would award in this instance. Now, they have decided to interdict Vodacom from making any sort of payments towards them. And Vodacom has responded and said that they will abide by the decision of the court. However, it seems as though Makate, as well as BlackRock Mining and the directors of BlackRock Mining, are engaged themselves in a settlement negotiation, with a letter having been written by BlackRock Mining attorneys to Makate's attorneys, Stimela and Liber attorneys, for them to consider and for a deal to be closed. Of course, a great deal of detail of that negotiation might come to the fore in the coming days. You'd recall that Makate had signed a settlement agreement with Vodacom, where analysts and experts estimate could be anywhere from 350 million rand all the way to 750 million rand. And it falls in that region. Vodacom had released their financial statements last week, Monday, and that's where a great deal of those calculations come from. And that is what is in your newspapers today.